In my previous video, the one I uploaded prior to this, I looked at a portion of Revelation 12 that had to do with a woman being protected for a period of a time, times and half a time in the wilderness. Now, I explained in that video that the woman is in fact the bride of Christ, who is the church. I explained how important it is to understand that she was only protected for a short period of time. For if we go to the book of Daniel, we are told that the time, times, and half a time is only 3.5 years. So this means the church was only protected from corruption for a period of 3.5 years. Well, this is important because we can then trace back all the way back to that period to know that corruption began to creep in even at that early stage. I explained that one of the ways our Father kept the bride pure was with the fear of him. He struck down Ananias and Sapphira, and he did so that believers would understand just how serious he was about keeping sin out of the church, that the church is to be filled with saints rather than sinners. This is how serious Yahweh is about wickedness and sin being in the church, being part of the bride of Christ. And what we see is that fear spread throughout the Christian community. Now, this is not a bad thing. There are pastors, there are preachers who teach that Peter actually did something wrong, that Peter was the reason this fear spread in the community, and that it wasn't what God wanted. It wasn't God's plan that Christians would be filled with fear. Well, I tell you, that's a lie. It is exactly what Yahweh wanted. He wants believers to fear him, to know what will happen if, after confessing his Son as your Lord and Savior, you continue to live in sin. Well, then that is going to be held against you, because more is expected of the believer, not less. Believers are supposed to live more righteous, more holy lives than what the unbeliever does. But today, because of the heretical teachings, because of the many different false gospels, what we find is that sin and wickedness is rampant in the church. And one of the reasons is because pastors and preachers no longer talk about the fear of the Lord and explain just how important it is. Well, now I'd like to continue on with Revelation 12 and discuss what it is that the dragon does, how he tries to destroy the bride of Christ. For we are told that water flows from the mouth of the dragon, and he tries to drown the woman with this water. Well, it's very important to understand what that water is, because if Yahweh removed his hand going all the way back to just 3.5 years after the birth of the church, then we know that this water was being poured out onto the bride going back to just that time period. Just 3.5 years after the birth of the church, the dragon started pouring this water onto the bride of Christ. So we need to know what that water is. Unfortunately, there aren't very many preachers and pastors teaching on exactly what this water is. Because if they did, they then wouldn't even be teaching much of what they are doing. I say this because we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls exactly what the interpretation is of this, exactly what the proper meaning is. Now, if you only read the Bible, there is a hint of what it is, because we do find water coming from the mouth of true prophets, true teachers, as being the truth, or being living waters. For the living waters are the waters, they are the teachings that flow from the mouth of the Messiah. And we are to have a thirst for those living waters, a thirst for the teachings the instructions and the commandments that come from the Messiah. And we are to drink that water. But in the case of the dragon, it's the opposite. These are lying waters. And we find this description in the Dead Sea Scrolls. For it tells us that the false prophets would spew lies onto the nation of Israel. So we have this depiction of lying prophets spitting onto the nation of Israel. Well, this is then what the dragon is trying to do to the bride of Christ. A flood of lies has come from the dragon to try and destroy the bride of Christ. And these lies go all the way back to just times and half a time after the birth of the church. This means then, when we look at the canon process, that there were lies that were part of that. And we need to understand that based on this information, we cannot trust the canon process. We cannot trust the people who were involved with it, because corruption had already crept into the church. And what really was going on at that time is the devil, who is the ruler of the world, who is the prince of the air. He is the one who did everything he could to eliminate as much of Yahweh's written word as what he could. And since then, he has been removing more and more of God's written word. Now, what about the earth opening up? If we know the water coming from the dragon are his lies that he tries to destroy the bride with corrupt and wicked doctrines and theologies, corrupt gospels. If we know this is what the water represents, then we need to next discern and interpret what the meaning is of the earth opening up. Well, this happened with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, for we find within a year there were two very important prophecies being fulfilled. One had to do with the reestablishment of the nation of Israel, for we find in the Old Testament that it tells us the nation of Israel would be reestablished with flying ships, which of course are airplanes. And that's exactly how people from all over the world were brought back to the nation of Israel. As well, prophecy tells us that this would happen under one flag. This, of course, is the United Nations flag. So we see the nation of Israel being reestablished exactly as Yahweh prophesied that it would happen. And at the same time, we find that the earth literally opened up by way of archaeological digs and gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, when we read the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find that there is plenty of information that helps us identify that John the Baptist, Yeshua himself, the apostles who walked with him, and most early Christians were Essenes. There is now so much evidence of this that it's ludicrous to now try and deny it. There's just far too much evidence. And what this does is it sheds light on the fact that there is much more to Yahweh's written word than what is found in any Bible. Knowing this, we can then determine that the canon process was corrupt, that the intent was Satan's to eliminate as much of God's written word as what he could. And so today, most believers have only a Reader's Digest version of God's written word. But now there's no reason to continue to believe and teach that lie. There is now so much evidence that Yeshua and the apostles actually taught from and referenced more non-canonical writings than what they did the canonical books that make up the Protestant Bible. So now that we have this information and we know that these prophecies were fulfilled, we need to look at the bride of Christ. Now that we know a lack of the fear of God has led to the sin and the wickedness that's in the church, in addition to only having a portion of God's written word. When we understand these two things, we can then look at the heretical church. We can look at mainstream Christianity and know what are the lies and what is truth. Now, today, there is a movement, a Hebrew roots movement that includes a movement towards the Essenes and their teachings, to be as the Essenes were, for most early Christians were Essenes. Unfortunately, there is a movement also to come against the Essenes. For example, there's a man by the name of Gary Wayne, who has become fairly popular on the fringe movement within Christianity. And he is attacking the Essenes as well as people who support and promote him, claiming that the Illuminati, Freemasonry, pretty much every secret society that we know of today, supposedly, according to Gary, have their roots back, or can find their roots back to the Essenes, and that the Essenes really are the ones who are behind these evil, wicked secret societies. Well, this is a lie from the devil. As well, there are those people within mainstream Christianity who are adamant that the Bible includes all of God's written word and that you should live according to sola scriptura, reading only the 66 books that make up the Protestant Bible. Well, now we know this is a lie. We now know that prophecy from Revelation 12 is being fulfilled, and that the lies of the devil, the lies of the ruler of this world, are being exposed. The question is, do you have discernment? The question is, are you truly searching for the truth, or do you care more about maintaining the model that was given to you by Christians of the past, by pastors and preachers who head the mainstream churches? Are you more concerned about maintaining church tradition and dogma, or are you truly searching the truth? Because if you are, if you have a critical mind and you look at the evidence, it truly is abundantly clear that there is much more to God's written word. And once you have it, the true path to salvation will be lit up for you. The path that has had shadows over it, the path that you perhaps have thought you've been on, but is in fact the wide path. When you have all of God's written word, or at least as much as what we can get today, it becomes clear just how difficult and narrow that path is that leads to the kingdom of God. And what you will see is that it is much narrower. It is far more difficult than what is being taught in most churches today. There is truly only a remnant who are following that narrow, difficult path. Faith is a gift that is given to many. However, only a few are chosen. So many receive the revelation of who Yeshua is. Many receive the gift of faith. But only a few are going to be chosen, because only a few will be able to walk that narrow, difficult path. Only a few will use that gift of faith to earn favor with the one that truly matters. Many others will try to have their cake and eat it too. Most people who receive this gift of faith will try to live with one foot in the church and one foot in the world. They will try to straddle two canoes, serving two masters. But we cannot do this. Yeshua is very clear just how much we have to give up. He is very clear that we are to count the cost. Unfortunately, most believers find the cost far too much and simply are not willing to pay it. They want to have not only a mansion in heaven, but a mansion here on earth. They worship the things of this world. They worship people. They idolize people. They crave the things of this world, everything that money can buy them. And this is why most believers are going to be spewed out, either because they are warm believers or because they are wicked believers, people who continue to live in sin. Yeshua tells us he will spew out the warm Christian, the warm believer, but he also tells us there's going to be people who will do wonderful things in his name, but he will say, get away from me, you worker of iniquity. So we know all we have to do is look and see if there's sin rampant in the church, and if the pastor or preacher is condoning it, if they are enabling sinners, not wanting to refute and rebuke them because they don't want to lose, that person as a member in their church, because they want their tithe to keep coming in. Because pastors and preachers are not rebuking sin, they are enabling the sinner, and this is going to cost them dearly come Judgment Day. All right, that's about all I have for Revelation 12. Till next time, peace and blessings.